Welcome back to the Elevate Your Best podcast. My name is Michael Danklefs. So today we're going to be picking apart a new idea. And this is going to lead in as well as play off some of the things we've talked about already up to this point. This idea of ego versus authenticity. Authenticity is a very almost overused word right now. So we're going to come back to some of how we define that so that we can all be on the same page. So why is this important? Why are we even going here? So some people say that the ego is bad. Sometimes people say the ego is good. Sometimes we say that we need to keep the ego under control. What is that? Where does it play out? So Bruno, would you share with me what your definition of ego is?
When it talks to ego, I'm not seeing ego as this bad thing, like comfort, because you related like authenticity to change and ego to comfort. I see it as an image, a portrait that we put together, a plan. And then I call like the wild ego and the serving ego. And the wild ego is the ego that you don't have control, you are not aware, you're not conscious, and it controls you. So when somebody tells something that is against the image that you wish to protect, to survive, you just blindly enrage or deny or just detach yourself, distance yourself from that. And even to the point where you create illusions for yourself, where I am this, I am that, and in practice you are nothing. This is the wild ego. It's commanding you. And you don't even notice. It's an invisible force. And then the person that exercises consciousness, they have the serving ego, which is, oh, I want to be a billionaire. And I want to be a billionaire. And I'm not exactly, because if I did, I would be a billionaire, but I'm learning and I'm like absorbing those things and talking to people. I want to be a billionaire. So people see me as such. And I understand that this is not who I am, but an image that I wish to project to the world in which it serves me. For you, Michael, for example, to understand Bruno is on this journey, how can I help him? That's the serving ego. Bruno is not a billionaire today. Bruno doesn't have the skills that a billionaire needs to possess that amount of resources. He just wants to get there. Can I help him? And that's more like the image that I have on the ego. Something very interesting to add into this ego talk is that I was in a session, an ayahuasca session, and I was working a few things. And then I had a moment where I went to drink water. And when I was there, I was reflecting. I had a reflection before about the ego, in which I was like, this is the realization that I came upon. Everything we put out there is our ego. Because everything we do, like outside of ourselves, we are walking on the street and then there is someone coming by and we just say something to ourselves. Actually, we are projecting an image because we know someone is watching, and we might do that because we wish to maintain our image with ourselves, even if nobody's watching, like might say something and it's just a maintenance of the image. So I realized like everything we project out is the ego. And then later into this same session, I was there drinking water. And then one of the directors, it's a couple that was organizing the ceremony, she went out of her house and she stopped nearby. And I thought like to ask, hey, how are things going? Like, how is the session? And then I felt this thing about asking her this. And then I connected with the thought I had before. I don't need to ask her how is the session. Like, I just need to go there to my place and go back meditating, because asking her how is the session is actually a projection of my ego. It's a maintenance of the image, and it's everything's okay. You don't need this. Move on, because everything we say is a projection of our ego as well. So the ego is a projection that we do in order to maintain our image, and an image of ourselves that is created to protect us. You made a complicated question there, but that is my answer.
Thank you, Bruno, for that. So, and I've done a little bit of study. I'm not a psychologist by any stretch. I know when I was on a men's team, we talked a fair amount about the idea of ego and what it looks like when it shows up with men. Tends to be when someone gets really defensive. So, like you said, defending what your identity is, tends to be more reactionary, tends to be this space when it's acting how you think you should be, which
Mhm.
can certainly be in contrast to that other concept that we're talking about, is your authenticity, is how you are, what is at the core of who you are, where are you at, where are you in your process, what are you working on, and how are you going to get there. So one of the key tenets in the code of honor for that team was commitment before ego, knowing that if I commit to something, if I say to someone else or to myself that this is something I'm going to do, then I need to take my ego out of it. It's getting to that place of being humble, that my identity is less important in some ways, of the identity of who I think I am is less important than me following through on that commitment that I'm making to another person. So your ego could certainly defend that as well. But if it's more around this idea of the protection of the story that we've made up about ourselves, is how I see it. It is that projection, yes. It's the story how we think we are, may not necessarily be the reality. So I can think that I'm only 5'2", but I'm not. I can think that I'm actually a harsh person, but that's not how I show up. I can be direct, and I could judge myself for being harsh and then continue to beat myself up about that. So then it's a matter of how do I navigate through that. I also know Bob Proctor talks about the ego quite a bit when he talks about the 4 paradigms: delay, distract, discourage, and disaster. And he attributes that chatter, that voice that comes up as you're getting ready to take on something new, like we talked about in a previous episode around change, that it is our ego that's doing the defending. It's saying, no, you can do that later, for delay or distraction of, hey, don't you want to do this instead? Or the discouragement of, how could you possibly do that? There's no way you failed at that the last 10 times. Or the disaster tends to be in the extreme state of anxiety or panic attacks or injury or illness or something else that becomes far more important. And he attributes the ego being that voice, that chatter, that diminishing talk to yourself. Dr. Daniel Amen talks about it as your automatic negative thoughts, those thoughts that come up, and he's got ways to help you squash those ants. I attribute most of those things to this concept that we call the ego, the judge, the person who sits back and discerns the difference in places. Judgment doesn't always have to be a bad thing. Depends on what story it's basing the judgment on.
I think it's interesting, some things that you mentioned, Michael. For example, when you were talking about the ego, you mentioned being under control from the ego, reactionary, seeing how things should be, and like some protection of the history that we talk about itself. This is so much related to the thing about the wild ego. And that's why I like to create these concepts. I do believe that we should never be creating words that do not exist to explain ideas and concepts, like not words that do not exist. Like we can create words that do not exist for something new. But the thing is, not use, if there is a word that has a definition that can explain what you want to convey, use that word. Like I already mentioned, I believe here in the episodes on the podcast, like the thing about constellation family, right, Michael? You have those things there, right? Family constellation.
A little bit.
Which is like what people talk about. They create this name, family constellation, and then they sell courses around that. And then the people that do the course, they actually learn something that is extremely valuable for them as human. So they go out talking about these names that nobody recognizes, and they are all this fantastic name like family constellation and things like that. And it's just talking about things that we all know, like your heritage, like the things that you inherit from your parents. And sometimes this is even genetic memory, like fears of colors, of sounds, or shapes that you are, of symbols that we are inheriting because some traumatic event happened in what people call previous lives, but it's the genetic memory. So they create those words and ideas to create groups and be able to sell something to that audience, but it's totally unnecessary. We could use words that everybody would understand, and it's a marketing strategy. I believe I already spoke about that. But the thing is, when I create these ideas of wild ego, the words define the thing. It's the wild ego. It's when your ego, it's out of control from you, from the conscious self. So yes, it controls you. We are actually being reactionary because then somebody, as I mentioned before, somebody comes and challenges an idea. You mentioned, Michael, the male community is very sensible to that because there's even sayings of fragile masculinity, because it's so easy to provoke a heterosexual cis male that is on like following standards. It's just for you to identify him with something out of the standard, and he's gonna be like, whoa, whoa, like this is the ego. He's being reactionary, and this reflects very well what I wanted to say. And there comes the increasing, like mentioning again that video from Vishen Lakhiani. It's very important information. The 4 levels of consciousness. It's a free idea that is out there. And that is no fancy words. It's like the 4 levels of consciousness that are, he talks about 4 levels of consciousness that we can all achieve. And the first one is the victim state, reactionary. And also Tony Robbins mentions that reacting comes from a position of lack of power. Reaction is weakness, while proaction, being proactive, planning, preparing, being ready, they're committed, it's from a position of strength. So reaction is weakness, and envisionment, like creating a plan, being prepared, and actually planning your life comes from an entire position of power. So we don't want a wild ego. We want to cultivate a serving ego, understand what our ego is, why that image is there, and not be a victim of it, and use this image to propel us forward.
Got it. So then I guess what I'm curious about then, you really dug deep on what that wild ego side of things is when things are uncontrolled, what is commonly considered when somebody is an egotist, that they're egotistical, that they actually run from their ego, is, it sounds like, that wild side. And so once again, I appreciate that the idea of renaming things may seem like a marketing ploy. What if it instead it's to reach a market that didn't get it with the original words?
I don't know. That's an entire discussion on its own. And I do believe it might be possible. It's because, Michael, when you create a new language, you create a group, you create a culture. This is one of the steps into creating a community. It's a marketing strategy that is actually taught. Perhaps you are not aware of that because you didn't study marketing. But one of the steps of creating a community is creating a language. And this can be done healthily when I create new words for the meanings that I wish to put. PewDiePie, he talks about simping, like floor gang and ceiling gang. Those are not like concepts that are actually in other cultures. They are exclusive from his culture. So this is a good application of that. And a bad application of that is, for example, when I say like family constellations, because constellations, it talks about celestial objects and has nothing to do with hereditary memory being passed through generations and learning with your peers through the subconscious mind, guiding by example, anything that is related to the actual thing that they are speaking. There's nothing to do with constellations. Like it's just a made up name that feels cool.
Okay.
So it's a terrible example.
So for English, the common term for that is jargon. It's the jargon that essentially the words inside the community that are only really known by the community. And that just about every single industry, just about every single community has a certain jargon to them. It's even if you go from country to country, the words that are used, even if they're speaking the same language, if you were to actually speak to somebody in Portugal versus in Brazil, there is a variation in the language because of how it's used locally. And not even just that there's a difference in the use of words, but the meanings of the words. Like in English, the term cool, for whatever reason, 70, 60, 70, 80 years ago, I don't remember when it came into popular use. Is it cool as in it's too cold, it's colder than this? Or is it that it's wicked cool? That's a positive thing. But if I were to go to England or to Australia or New Zealand, is cool a word that's actually considered a good thing? Who knows? And some of that's by usage, but I get the branding strategy being something different. And that's why one of the reasons why I wanted to really pick apart is, especially as we unfold and actually start talking about some of these concepts further along, is what is the basis? How are we defining these particular words so that we can actually work from there rather than purely what's commonly said, not to create our own language, but at least now we have a foundational experience so that we can move forward. I know the same thing is true for the lifebook process. It's true for transformational weekend work, that when you have that experience with other people and you're speaking the same language, you're on the same page, it's a lot easier to communicate between people because you have that mutual experience. So it lays the groundwork for this.
One other thing I wanted to mention that I was going to mention in the beginning and I just jumped through it, is that this is a tool of segregation because, for example, if I am there, this is related to my personal values and things like that. That's why I pay attention to this. If I go into venture capital, like if I go into a startup event, people will value me based on some jargons that I might or may not have. And people will be talking about pivoting and scaling, and they will have a whole language that is just from that community. Is that okay? That is okay. It's bad when we start to not give credibility to people that do not have those symbols in their vocabulary, instead of teaching them those symbols. Some communities, they do that. Some communities, instead of spreading the symbols, they use them as a sign of how deep you are, how credible you are, how valuable you are. And it's a tool of segregation. And we should never create segregation. When you use words that are from the vocabulary and that people will understand the concept behind the words easily, even if they are not into that community has a language, but they can come. And if they are talking about something that is new and doesn't have a definition yet, they quickly spread it. Oh, simping is when you are like on a game room or any online environment or any environment, and a girl comes and the men just start treating it differently, laying down the red carpet, and everything is available and all the attention is on the girl. That is simping. So you can easily grasp because it's like this concept. But when we use words that are already in the vocabulary and are easily translated to other vocabularies, like they become a tool of unification instead of a tool of segregation.
And yet, simping is not a term that I hear anywhere else.
Because it's just from the PewDiePie community.
So it's still, once again, so as an example, so with that idea of jargon and picking out marketing ploys, I have a tendency many times to quote movies. And that then elicits a response for that scene in a movie that other people have a mutual experience. And then if you're in the in crowd versus if you're not in the in crowd. So if I roll off a Monty Python quote because I found it hysterical and it applies in this area, no one's ever, if a person hasn't seen that or experienced that, they're going to feel left out, which can certainly have a bad outcome, unless of course you're willing to educate someone So even for my daughter, there's like the required reading list is you need to experience these things so that whenever I'm talking to you, we're on the same page. And so the inclusivity aspect of that is, let's get on the same page. But as an example, I won't know what it's like to be a slave on a boat coming over from Africa to the United States. I've never been there. There's gonna be experiences that are there that I won't ever be able to get in contact with. That doesn't mean I can't respect someone's journey if that is in their history. I can respect the struggles that they've gone through, but I'm never going to be able to talk from a place of authenticity of what that looks like. I can have empathy, but I won't have sympathy. I haven't ever been in that same space.
And here is the interesting bit. I was thinking we were off topic here, but actually when you spoke about, I spoke about segregation, and then you spoke about required list, and then being part of things, I was like, yes, actually this also relates with the ego and the authenticity, because in society, there is this being left out feeling when you are not aware of some basic understanding, some basic culture, let's say like that. And when does that actually conflicts with your authenticity? Let's talk about authenticity, Michael. We hear a lot about it because we are active members on the Mind Valley class, Mastering Authentic Networking. And in the beginning, particularly people that get to the class, they ask a lot like, what about authenticity? How am I becoming authentic? Am I not like trying to sell something, trying to sell an idea or something like that? I was even talking with my future business partner about the burger shop that we are opening. And I was talking to him about the vision for the future for the whole thing. And he asked me, are you trying to sell me an idea, Bruno? And I was like, of course. Why does a scenario later came into my mind? Why does a billionaire visits another one? He wants to sell an idea. If a billionaire gets out of his way and goes to another guy's house or event, and it says to each other, I have something we need to discuss. There's something we need to talk about. Let's schedule something together. Like he schedules something with another person. He's probably there to sell an idea. And it's all about that. We are all selling ideas. And what I believe about this is that we should have a culture instead of being a quote from Monty Python, and it might be part of our culture. We should indeed have a culture that if people are not aware of it, they feel left out. Because it's, oh, you are not behaving properly in society. We should have it. It shouldn't be valuing movies and things like that, but it should be. But for you, Michael, if you have something to comment on what I just said, it's okay. But for you, I would like to hear more about what is this authenticity thing?
A lot about with me is almost counter to being inauthentic. Is you talked about the idea of selling something. There's various terms that are used around that for vocabulary of enrolling someone in an idea. Is I've got this idea, this is why it's important, this is how it can impact you, this is the positive outcome that can come from me sharing this idea with you. And that is any kind of conversation when there's any kind of debate. But whenever we're talking about authenticity, like I said, it's almost like I'm selling you this because I need to make money. And that's the only reason why you need to buy this. It's very different. My approach tends to be of, what is your problem? I see that the problem is this. Here's a solution I have that can help you with that. This is the exchange that's going to get us, me getting that solution to you. That's what I'm learning to do, because that to me is how to enroll people in an idea and to exchange value between two people, or one person in a group, or one person in an industry. But it needs to come from this place of, for me, I need to truly believe in that thing that I'm bringing to you and feel that it will actually help solve a problem that you have. Otherwise, I'll actually talk you out of it. No, you don't need to buy that. I'd keep doing that manually rather than buying the tool to do that, because if you're doing it once a year, it doesn't make sense to spend $10,000. But if you've got a $10,000 problem and I've got a $10,000 solution, then I want to connect those together. That's the space that I come from, and which may make me less successful as a salesperson or as a marketer, because I'm going to do my best not to exaggerate the effect of something. And at the same time, where the authenticity more commonly, I think, happens, especially in coaching and in areas of service from one person to another, is you actually downplay it, which is also inauthentic. If you apologize, if you hold back, if you pull back, rather than showing up 100%, showing up fully. We talked about in always do your best in our 4th episode, is always do your best, is showing up fully in this moment. That when I'm being authentically myself is when I'm showing up 100%, because I feel I can't give you 110% of who I am. I'm not going to cut off my hand and hand it to you so that you can be better, because then I don't have a hand. At the same time, if I'm only going to show up 90%, what would have been a different outcome if I showed up with that in place comes into play whenever, especially if I don't fulfill the goal that I'm looking for. So authenticity plays into this. And sometimes, in my experience and what I've done, ego is what tends to downplay those things for many people. That idea of imposter syndrome, that idea of I'm not good enough, that idea of I need to do more in order to be more. It's the ego, that's that voice that's chattering and saying you're not good enough yet to do that.
Great. And it's interesting, Michael. Interesting what you just spoke about authenticity and the sales thing. How do I see the authenticity, for example, in the sales thing? It's basically what you say, just giving it a different light, a different perspective. It's like I do marketing. Authenticity has to do with consciousness and awareness. We need to be conscious of our strengths, our weakness. The ego is on the way of that. What you say is very true. Like the ego gets on the way of the authenticity, because it's hard sometimes to recognize that we are not so good at something. It comes on the way because the fixed mindset leads us to not take risks on things that we do not believe we are going to have good results. And it also leads us into not accepting that we might not be good into something because it leads to rejection, and we wish to avoid that. So the ego then creates an image that, oh, I don't need to learn. That's not necessary. I already know that, and things like that. I work with a guy that everything that I would tell him about marketing, he would already know, but then he would immediately after speak me or say things to me and make questions that would signal to me he doesn't know what he just told me he would already know. So how do I communicate with someone like that? Because the ego is completely on the way. That person, the ego closes the faculty of that person to new information because he believes he already knows it. He displays that he doesn't know it, and there is no way for me to give him this information because he believes he already knows it. He doesn't need me talking. So every effort that I do to help the situation move forward is deemed unnecessary and unworthy. Very complicated situation in which the ego is on the way of that person moving forward. But here's the thing. How do I do the sale thing? I understand that I do know marketing and I have confidence in my strength on marketing. I also recognize my weaknesses. So if somebody comes with information, I need to understand that I do not know everything and I need to accept it. But then I do, like you say, Michael, I find problems that I can solve. And I just accept it. It's that, put aside the imposter syndrome and everything, like accept that you do know how to do things. And why repeating this way is important, because here is one of the things that we disconnected from, like our sense of community and our collective being that is essential for the health of this collective being. And because we can survive without it, we are not valuing and we are not using. We don't need all this marketing thing to sell us. We just need to understand there are things that we need There are people that will provide those things, and we need to not be manipulated, but create relationships with the people that can provide our solutions. I need food. Why do I go into a shop that I don't know? Why do I have to go in a different restaurant everywhere? When I get to restaurant, Michael, this is something that I learned. Sometimes I invite friends to go to restaurant and they make observations like as if I were some VIP person or as if I were the owner of the restaurant. And why? Because I get there everywhere I frequent. Every shop I go, I do know the owner. I do know what's going on in his life. I do care for his business. I have loyalty and I go back there and I am treated well because I understand that there is a person there. It's a service, but there is a person. When we engage with a company, engage with the company, understand what are the values, what is the mission, what is that company bringing to community, because it is bringing something. And there are businesses that we don't wish to support. That's how I see the authenticity into the sales thing. Just be aware of what you have and have objectives of your weaknesses, play your strengths to the market, sell your strengths to the market, accept it, don't feel guilty about it. Like I am a marketer, I will sell marketing, and do your marketing in a way that it reaches the communities and benefits the community, because then people will just buy your product authentically. Did it make sense, or I just went too deep into the rabbit hole, Michael?
No, I get it. I get it. And it's one of the things that I appreciate about you is that you are a marketing person. That's your tools, that's your skill set that you've grown. I am not. That's not where I've really spent a lot of time. I've been on the serving side of things. I've been on the delivery side of things, and that's where I want to focus. But it's why we work really well as a team is I'm on the serving side, you're on the marketing side, and it balances each other out. We challenge each other of how do we make this more authentic, because that's really where I'm coming from as far as on the service side, and you at the same time want to do it authentically for the market. And I think that once again, that's where we vibrate together. But there's been times too when we have disagreed on something, and where that disagreement comes from, this is what I know, this is how it, and we haven't got quite to the place yet where I've seen of this is how it is, this is how it's going to be because I said so. It's been much more of this is how I want to do things, help me understand where you're coming from. And that's when we actually can observe the ego, hear the chatter, and then say, no, I'm going to act in a different way than the chatter because the chatter doesn't serve me. So it really, it plays out in a way, I think, that the way that you sell things and the way that you sell the products that you do and the way that you market your products works in this arena. And that's that jargon, that industry, you know how that's done. And I work in this space and I'm learning to work more in this space, which has sometimes a different jargon, sometimes has a different focus, has a different product that we're looking to sell, that we're looking to serve in the community. And it's us then coming together. And I think that we've had an opportunity to put our ego aside and really connect as people. So I know what's going on in your life, what's going on in mine, because we are connecting at that level. So it's not just a matter of we're doing this because I said so. It's that this is my history. This is actually where I'm coming from. This is how I want to serve. And this is what my brand, this is what my identity is in this space. So that's been really helpful, I think.
And why is this related to authenticity? Because I spoke so much, and why is this related to authenticity? Because when you know, Michael, you are a coach, and what is your strengths, what is your weaknesses, and you are present. Another thing very important in the authentic person, they are present. When you see a situation, it's not about someone paying you to coach them. It's not about like someone making it of interest to you. It is already of your interest. It is your purpose. You are aware of those things. So authenticity has a lot to do with consciousness. You are conscious of your purpose, like of your weaknesses, of your strengths, of your purpose, of your mission. Like I am here to qualify people for better opportunities. My vision is to destroy social segregation in any means that I can. So every day when I'm out there and I see someone that is producing content, I just say to this person, hey, I do know a tool called Notion that could greatly help you. And there I am qualifying that person for a better opportunity. And people do make remarks like, even in the bar, Michael, I'm talking to people in the bar, and then a friend looks to the other and say, he's so authentic, right? Because it's just this, like, I am there, I know what I'm doing in my life. That's why I'm authentic. And I know it's a big jump from the person that feels lost, because I have felt lost, I have felt without purpose. And that's why we have so much conversations. It's a journey. There is a lot of steps for us to take, and a lot of quieting to do into the mind before you get to that point where you really feel authentic to yourself. But it's not impossible. And the authenticity is about, it's about discovering who you are, what is important to you. Like, for example, values. What are the values that you have in a relationship? They are so important, right, Michael? If we don't have the same values in a relationship, there'll be a lot of arguing, a lot of that. So when you know what are your values, you can be more authentic to your partner. Things like that. Be aware of who you are. And the ego, going back again to the ego, be aware that the ego is like, the authenticity is who you really are. You can shape that. I don't know, perhaps the person doesn't like something that they have inside of them. We can talk about the shadow. We might have an episode just about the shadow. I believe that we both will have lots to talk about. And so there is this authentic self, that is the shadow, the parts that we sometimes don't want to accept. Your shadow, accept that you have failures, accept that you had experiences where you might have made some wrong decisions, or that you might have parts of you that are hurt because of the experiences you had in the past. Like Michael's mission, shed light into the dark corners. There are dark corners into every single one of us. We need to take a look at them and understand that the ego is not yourself, it's an image. It serves a purpose. And this purpose is to guide you into becoming who you wish to be. So even if your authentic self is not something that is pleasing you right now, that's when the ego comes into play. Right, Michael?
Absolutely. And one thing I want to play off on too is, I touched on this a little bit earlier, but I want to come back and I know we're going to talk about this in a later episode about the shadow work. Is after going through some of the work with Charlie Morley and his lucid dreaming quest, he talks a lot about the shadow. Yes, doing shadow work. And it's as much about the dark shadow, those things that we have some maybe guilt and shame about, but it's also the light shadow as well, is that gift that we actually keep putting off because we don't feel like we deserve to step into it. And both are very important to embrace. There's lots of quotes about this, about it's my light that I'm the most afraid of versus the dark. So we'll certainly delve a little bit into that. And we're coming back to this subject of there's twofold things that I want to bring up when we're talking about this, is what tools we can take away from this. What tools can we use in order to get the best out of both of these concepts for us? So these are going to be counterpoints too of the same thing. So meditation for me is one of the big things that has helped me be aware of the ego, is listening for that noise and that chatter to make me aware. Is whenever I'm stilling my body, listening to my breath, and observing the conversation that goes on in my head. Tends to be the ego, tends to be that there's some insight underneath that, some intuition that can come in with that. But like that cacophony, that cocktail party in my head, I attribute to the ego. Is it's doing its best to protect me. It's actually bringing all this experience forward to say, this is why that won't work. Meditation can allow me to observe that, accept it, and let it go. That to me is what the practice of meditation is about. But the other side of this too is, we can't just analyze, we can't just think about this stuff. We also need to then take the action to confirm our theory, confirm our hypothesis. And that's how we can determine, okay, the ego says this is happening. Okay, let me go take an action on that. Let me experiment. Let's actually do a trial of that and see if I take this action, will I get that outcome? And it's not from this place of, I'll show you. It's more of, okay, that's an interesting idea. Let's see what happens. Let's play into this. And both, I think, are necessary. It is part of this balancing act of, we don't want to be doing things without having some forethought into it, but we also don't want to overanalyze it that we never get to taking the action either. So it's a lot about what we talk, and we'll be talking about this, I know, in a future episode, as well as the idea of the law of attraction, the secret, this idea of that as you are in the vibration of something, then it's going to be available to you. Doesn't mean you don't take action. It's not that I sit and meditate for 23 hours in a day and all of a sudden my life has become perfect. It doesn't happen. I can intend all I want to. That doesn't necessarily mean that if I have 5 people who walk up to me and want to have a conversation with me, and it's like, no, I'm visualizing my future. Those people are showing up because they're being attracted to what I'm trying to do, and I need to have the conversation with them so I can act on that visualization that I'm looking for. There's a reason that they're there, either for contrast of what I don't want, or they're showing up to help serve that vision that I'm creating. We have to take the actions. We have to take that step forward and maybe put ourselves at risk, which the ego hates, because you're putting yourself at risk. It's what it's programmed to protect us from, because we may get hurt, we may get disappointed, we may also get more than we asked for, but it's also afraid of, because more of something isn't always a great thing. And so our ego is trying to keep us on the status quo, keeping us on a steady path, because that's what's worked up to this point. But not always do the tools that we used a year ago, 5 years ago, 30 years ago, going to serve for what we're doing right now. So I told you that the best way to watch a movie right now is on a reel-to-reel 8mm film. People are gonna go, no, they have better things for that. It's called streaming. You know, I mean, that technology was only 30 years ago, was the best that there was at the time. And the same thing is true of our thinking. We do mature and evolve and get more information. We learn more. We gain more wisdom as we take action. And I think that's one way that we can hear what the ego is trying to tell us, but then we back up our counter with the data that we've collected, the information, the wisdom that we've earned over the number of times we've done XYZ successfully. And coming from that space of, yes, I'm taking action, and the humility of saying, this is my 2nd time doing this, this is my 5th time doing this, and owning that is where we have the possibility of being authentic, instead of, I'm king shit over in this arena, so of course I'm going to be king shit in that arena. Maybe not. Being, you mentioned actually that idea of the person that you're talking to already knowing everything. So there's never any time that you're going to get in and teach that person anything. That's ego talking. I already know everything there is to know. But do you?
There is a thing there called, like, I identified some phenomena at this period of my life, because it's the phenomena that says something like that. Because I hear something, when I know something, I hear about it, I recognize it. That's it, recognizing and being familiarized. Because he recognized the keywords that I was saying, he thought he knew what I was talking about, but he was just recognizing the words. So when I was going to explain something, he was like, no, I already know all about that. I already know about this. He would say some things like, I read all the blog posts. And here's the thing, because he recognized, he was thinking he already knew, but recognizing is different from being familiar with the thing. So then you have becoming familiar with the thing, which is recognizing what it is, how it works, how things are manipulated. And then I could go forward and say that taps into later become proficient with that thing. It's a different level. And then becoming an expert, even mastering the thing. There are 4 levels of learning. That's an interesting topic for us to even talk about. Unconscious failure, when you are unconscious while you are failing. conscious failure when you start to become conscious of why you're failing. So we will never start something, do it for the first time and succeed, because the first stage, it's mandatory to be unconscious failure. You try and you fail. And then the next stage in order to learn, and that's why you can learn anything by yourself, is conscious failure. You just start to understand why things are going wrong. And then you have unconscious success, which is the third stage, where you start to have positive results that you wanted to acquire. And it's unconscious. You don't know why we are acquiring those results. It's unconscious success. And then we have, actually, it's conscious success. We start to be aware of the things we do. We discover things we do that give us success. It's conscious success. So in our search, we start to find things that we do that give us success. It's a search process. And then we have unconscious success. It's when we just act like naturally or react naturally, successfully, without being conscious about the thing. So those are the processes, and we need to understand, we get to understand this, because when we understand this, it empowers us into being able to learn more. That's why I tend to like explaining things so in detail and in words that people can absorb, can access, people have in the vocabulary, because this way, when we understand, understanding is power, understanding is manipulation. But just that you
I want to touch on
go
that a little
there,
bit
go
too,
there.
is that the idea of explaining it in a vocabulary that people understand. I like that idea, and I think that's one of the places where, at least in English, I'm actually proficient, is being able to reframe something to a different perspective so somebody understands. That's what I consider one of my strengths. It is the translator in some ways. So now you're talking about jargon as a bad thing. I want to be the bridge that actually says, okay, this is the term in your life, and this is how that is actually held in this space. So let's get you there so that we're talking in the same level. Such as source has so many different meanings depending on who you're talking to. If it's in marketing, it's how did you ask somebody to buy your product? In programming, it's the code that actually makes the program. In spirituality, it's actually what your connection to your higher power is. So it's a matter of knowing the context that you're in, as well as knowing how to translate in the scope of that context. And I think that's where a lot of the personal development teachers is in a place of translation. It's in a place of, this is how this term, this is how I define, this is how you can shift your meaning that you apply to it so that you can then apply that more efficiently in your life.
Great. And I see myself not as a teacher. I see myself more as a philosopher. Like, I'm the person that runs through ideas, scenarios. I like to have conversations. That's why I have so much work to do into the shoots. We need all those words that it's not good, useful for us to be using. And when I try to explain things, when I communicate things to other people, I sometimes am seen as arrogant or demanding how people should act. It's not exactly that. It's that I am more on the spectrum of fleshing out ideas and trying to find those words, Michael, that more people will understand, trying to explain concepts that are usable for everybody and that are essential in ways that these people can use on their lives. And I like when you spoke about the light shadow, because the thing about this is that indeed we do have some unresolved things inside of us that keep us from moving forward. And what I would like to mention about that is that thing about feeling safe confidence on your strengths. Don't play your weaknesses. Like, some people, they wish to be strengthening their weaknesses, so they are to spread. They are not actually experts in anything. Play your strengths. Like, Know what you are good for. This guy that I'm getting together to do a business, he's really good in communication, branding. He has an online presence that people want to relate to. So I'm like, this is your strength. You are the branding guy, the guy that's gonna be the face of the brand, communicate with the audience, engage people. You are the guy from the engagement. Play on your strengths. And he's like, he's stuck into his business because he's doing the administrating, the inventory, he's doing everything. And I'm like, put someone to, let's create the structure to put someone to be taking care of your inventory, to taking care of the requests of the clients that get there. And you focus on branding. Get people to provide for your weaknesses. Again, work into communities. We are so much stronger when we remember that we are not alone, that we are part of an organism, and that we need to interact with this organism and value it. And this will give room for us and give confidence for us to say, okay, this is who I want to be. This is what I want to do. And let go, let free your light, the light shadow, let your light shadow free. I need to wrap my mind around those concepts, but let this potential that we have in ourselves go, and use your ego in order to help you get there. One last thing I would like to mention, Michael, I know we are up on time. I'm trying to wrap up everything, but one last thing I think that's very useful to mention is when you communicate to other people who your ego is, I want to be, this is my goal. And it requires a lot of confidence to do that. Recognize that you are not that, but you want to go there. And also to fight with people that will argue with you, you are not that, and make them understand, help them understand that I am not this. It's a journey. I am on this journey. I want to become this. And then fight with the people that will understand this and then just tell you, who are you to want to become that? But have this in mind. Your ego is there to help you, but it's an image that when you connect with your authentic self, and this is who I wish to be, this is part of me, those are my strengths, my weaknesses, all the things like my shadow, my light shadow, and then you use your ego as a tool to help you put all this together, align all this, and create a life vision, which we will talk later, and use all those tools to serve you into your journey and become closer to your ego. And every time you get closer to it, you can build further on it and be like, okay, so now I am all this. Now that I'm on the peak of the mountain, what else can I see that I would like to acquire and become?
It's awesome whenever I hear some of my own words coming out of other people's mouths.
Yeah, it's cool.
Yeah. And I really, this idea of humbly, which is not diminishing, it's the awareness of your strengths and your weaknesses, playing to your strengths so that you grow there, accepting your weaknesses and get back up for those so that you have someone that can fill the gap there, so you can see that from another perspective and then trust them to do that with you. I think it's the key to any community. That community, that team can be a team of two and still be effective, because no one person, I feel, as you said, no one person can really be 100% of everything. In your business, can you pull it all off all by yourself? Some do as solopreneurs, and they actually can do a great job. Is there value in leveraging the gifts of someone else so that you can focus on your sphere of genius, your core strength? And I think that there's a fair amount of value there. And authentically being vulnerable enough to say, yes, I can troubleshoot problems because that's an area of strength, but I have difficulty on this side. I have trouble keeping the books. Being vulnerable enough to say that and say, please, can you help me? And it needs to come from a place rather than of, I don't have time for that. Is the ego, smashing somebody else down. You've got plenty of time for that, but I don't. Instead saying, this is your area of strength. I'm going to work in my area of strength. And I love for us to work together so that we can use your area of strength for us both to benefit by it.
And by the way, Humbling has nothing to do, being humble has nothing to do with being weak, being poor, being things like that, being fragile. Of course, humble people, accept their vulnerabilities, but it has to do, I like how you say, Michael, the acceptance of strengths and weaknesses. Because if I am a great speaker, like I have this, I'm a great author, and then I have a marketing person, and I trust that marketing person. Like, I'm not as good at marketing, please, can you help me? And then this person comes and puts all my marketing campaign together. And then that person comes and say, hey, I really think that the story plot of your book should change here and there. I can humbly say to that person, you can leave the storyline of the book with me because I have more experience. Of course, I'm not saying do not accept because that person is coming with a different perspective. But let's say that person comes and with a different perspective, you consider that, but then you have reasons on your expertise, on your experience, on why the story is built that way, why the inventory is organized in a way. Apply this to any scenario. But the area of your expertise where you have strength, you can say to that person, like, you can leave this to me. I'll take care of it. I trust you to take care of my marketing campaign. Or I am a professor in jiu-jitsu, and there's a guy that comes with marketing advice and he say, hey, you should treat community different and things like that. And I have an experience in building that community. I can totally say, hey, you can leave the team taking care of the team with me. I have the team taken care of, and I need you to focus on that. That is humbling as well. The way I see it, I don't know if you agree, Michael.
I do. And I get that. It's like owning that on our side is this is my dance space. This is your dance space, which is a movie quote.
Yeah.
Is I'll be the expert in my space, and thank you for the feedback. I'll take it under advisement, but this is why I've got that laid out. Even like we were talking a little bit earlier today about the logo.
Just one thing, because when you just say something, they're very important. Like, I'll take your feedback and I will analyze it. That was a key information that I missed and I was trying to convey, because when you are really strong into that area, you have this judgment. It's not that you are closed, like people that are really strong in an area, they're not close to what they know, otherwise they wouldn't be strong. They just have this capacity, they have much more reference in order to analyze the information that comes. So do get the information, do analyze, do consider the scenarios in which you might not be right, very important, but then be humble to trust your expertise, to trust your strength and go with it.
And trust the fact that the wisdom that you've already brought to it. If you've been there 16 times before and you've failed 15 out of 16 times, you got to look at that one time you succeeded and apply that in this situation versus, as you said, someone who doesn't have an expertise in that area. Their experience is their experience. You've got to honor that. That's how they received it. Whatever you said, whatever you did, whatever they are actually working with. Awesome. And that person who's giving the feedback may not be your client, may not be the person that you're looking to serve. So should I change my product for someone who's not who I'm looking to serve? I personally am not going to be a clothing designer. It's not my area of expertise, and I'm not going to tell somebody how to wear clothing. I know how it looks to me when it's on somebody. That's great feedback, is that looks great on you, or that doesn't look so great. But I'm not a clothing designer. That's not my space. I can share how it makes me feel when I see somebody in a particular outfit, but I don't get professionally paid for that. That's not the value I bring to somebody. For me, it's asking someone questions is, how does it feel when you're wearing that? What are your thoughts about yourself while you're wearing it? That's the route that I'm going to come from it, rather than giving you I do not have the design eye. I just don't. That's not what, but it's more a matter for me of how does someone feel when they're in that space. So that's where I play to my strengths, is asking those questions that someone is either avoiding or doesn't know to ask.
You were going to mention something about the logo?
Yes, even feedback on logo or even some of our campaigns when we're working together is this is the route that I want to go. This is the end result I want to look for. And you have experience in marketing, and I'm working with a branding person. So we're coming to a solution that has more weight, and getting feedback from different people have different opinions. And I take that into advisement and understand why that piece is actually missing. And then how do I resolve that? If there's even a need there, but once again, logos are intended to express an emotion from someone or elicit an emotion from someone. Is that going to create that emotion for myself first as the brand for my company? And then does that trigger that same kind of emotion to the people? And I like getting people's feedback, but that's not a space where I'm solely deferring that idea to someone else, because it's my business at this point, and I want to support and see that business grow. I want to be a coach that's working full-time as a coach and delivering the value that I can from the experience I've earned. And that's the space I want to play. And even as we're recording the podcast episodes, I enjoy the processes. I'm learning to refine my message and refine my skills. But I don't consider myself a podcast producer either. Instead, I'm bringing coaching to the next level by playing in this space in the open.
Great, Michael. And I do think we had a great conversation today. I know that we went a little bit over the time, but I think that I think that we had a nice discussion around those ideas of authenticity and the ego. Do you think that there is anything that you would like to add, Michael?
I think we've covered everything that I really wanted to get into, and I feel pretty solid at this. So I'm ready to wrap up, because I think that was a great conversation. It brings out more ideas and externalizes that, so I can take a look at it and then put it back in, and then start taking action towards making that into my reality, so I can help others do the same. So thank you, Bruno, again for your time. I want to wrap up here. This has been a fantastic conversation. And if you've stuck it out to the end, if you haven't hit the like button yet already, we need to have a talk. We need to coach on that fear of pushing that like button, because you've stuck it out here. If you haven't subscribed yet, I encourage you to do that if this is something that you really enjoyed, because we like having these conversations, and knowing that others are receiving value from this is very valuable for us as well. If there's a comment, if you have something about ego that you want to share with us, or about authenticity, or both, leave that here. Leave it in a comment. Engage with us. That's how we learn. That's how we grow. I'm humble enough to say that I don't know everything. I may act like I know it all sometimes, but I know that I don't. So please challenge. I'm open to that. And it's because I don't help others elevate their best more than I help to elevate my own. This is Michael Danklefs of Elevate Your Best.
And I am Bruno Martins from the Cyber Journey. Thank you guys for hearing us, and see you on the next talk.